everyone to our presentation on the Technical Advisory Committee, the Infrastructure Data BMP update. I have with me here Dean Grantham. Dean has over 21 years of experience with the implementation of integration of GIS, GPS, aerial, and satellite imagery within government organizations. He is an IT project manager with North Carolina DIT and has previously worked with NCDOT with experience with GIS consulting and local governments. So Dean is actually the chair of the infrastructure working group within the Technical Advisory Committee of the GICC, and I've been working with him closely, so I'm really interested to hear his presentation. I want to let you all know that as we go along, there's a chat button. Please go ahead and log into there and enter your questions as we go, and we'll answer those at the end. So Dean, take it away.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. And we'll go ahead and get started. As Colleen said, I appreciate that gracious introduction there. I am the chair for the Technical Advisory Committee within the GICC. Hang on just a minute. And I felt like it was a good idea to maybe give an example or give some introduction to the GICC as well. So the GICC is the Geographic Information Coordinating Council. It's set up as a governor directive within North Carolina state government, I think, to serve the citizenry of North Carolina in terms of GIS applications and geospatial technology in a nutshell. It consists of a group that is made up of appointees. I am the appointee from the Department of Environmental Quality, and I also serve as the committee chair for the GIS Technical Advisory Committee. There are some other committees that are listed down there at the bottom of my slide, and I think you've heard from a lot of those other folks throughout the course of the conference. So the TAC is kind of a committee that's set up to deal with sort of ad hoc requests, if you will. So some of the things, I've copied this off of the website. So it's dealing with hardware, software, database standards, those kinds of things, and how they relate to GIS technology, or we could say geospatial technology, relating in the North Carolina context, that is. It may also do research or make recommendations, and that's really what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today, for the way that we might distribute information, or the way that the state's core standards are set up. So there's a lot of different things that the TAC may address throughout time, but we're going to talk about one specific work plan goal, or one specific objective. When I took over the chairmanship within our work plan for that particular committee, we had this one work plan goal, which was to produce infrastructure data best management practices, document outlining what data could be shared easily and how it would be shared and what cannot be shared. So to that end, we set up a sort of a work group, and that work group consists of about 17 people. There are 4 representatives from state agencies, 4 from municipalities, 4 from counties, as you know, in the county context, and then 5 private folks. The private folks are corporate utility organizations. Duke Power is the representative that we have, or the couple of the representatives we have. We've got some other folks that are in private land development that contribute to the group. The counties and the municipalities were very deliberately chosen from emerging to major, or from metropolitan to rural, however you wanted to look at that. So we wanted to get a good broad footprint of maybe more rural counties, as well as, you know, pretty much urban counties, and the same thing for municipalities. Those municipalities that may be small, or you know, smaller in size and in terms of population and resources, but then also those that are very well developed, so like Charlotte or Raleigh or Durham. So we were able to get partnerships, basically, or get attendance, or folks to contribute to the work group from each one of those kinds of things, or areas, if you will. So our approach, what emerged initially was that we wanted to do the obvious things, which is produce a layer inventory of infrastructure data. And I'll get to exactly how we're terming infrastructure in just a little bit, but a basic layer inventory or catalog. What data layers are out there, what may be out there, what is curated, what is not, those kinds of things, to just get some feeling. And granted, we understand through this process that there are varying degrees of resources that these particular agencies have. So some may be very adept at collecting information, others may not be, but that's okay. We just wanted to get some sense of an inventory of what may exist out there, not a mandate or anything that said that you had to produce this, but just what was out there. And then the second part of that was use cases. We wanted to hear from this group how infrastructure is being used, so how it could be consumed, and then also how it could be provided. So there was two different distinctions with use cases, from the consumption side and from the providing side. So how a particular agency or county or municipality maintains their data, how they make it available, or even if they make it available in some situations, or how a private land developer may use that, or more specifically, how a state agency like DOT, for instance, when they're doing a highway realignment or an intersection change, how the benefit of having infrastructure data for them is huge. It's a very big impact to their time, as far as efficiency goes, and their expense, when you consider that if they were to interrupt some type of infrastructure, there might be some monetary compensation that happens there too to get that back up and running. And then the third thing is kind of the deliverable. We wanted to come up with kind of a best management practice, or a guide, or some guidelines, I guess is what I'm trying to say there, to recommend how infrastructure data, if it is available, how it may be shared, and then maybe get some idea of how important it would be to the betterment of each one of these agencies or each one of these areas. So kind of tying the layer inventory together with the use cases. So here's what data we have, here's how that particular data set could be used. So that's kind of where we're going. So to date, we have accomplished a lot of the first two pieces there. I don't think either one of them are necessarily complete. So we're still soliciting feedback. So I will give you a heads up. I believe just on the previous slide, there was a QR code there. So if you wanted to take your phone, you could scan that code and get to these documents. And I've got another place, actually it's on my last slide. So I'll just give you a heads up there for how that might be used. So the initial task, again, was to document data layers, to get a list of layers, and then seek member feedback on how that information is shared presently. We knew that that's going to be a sort of a broad reach across this very diverse group that we have. But it was still worthwhile to do. And then the other thing that I previously mentioned, again, was to develop or document use cases. So again, those use cases were one of two areas. So it was either in data providers or data consumers. So how data could be used, or how it is made available and curated or maintained. We have tried to coordinate with some of the other committees within the GICC. So the State Government Users Committee, the Local Government Users Committee, and the Federal Users Committee as well. Just to see if there were other use cases that they could provide. And like I say, this is very much an ongoing effort. We are, I don't know, about a year into working on it, or about six or 8 months, I guess we should say. So with that being said, we're still soliciting feedback. So those of you that are listening to this presentation, I would encourage you to reach out to me, and my contact information will follow, but to reach out to me if you're interested in what we're doing, or if you just need more information about it. So in determining our infrastructure categories or, that sort of list or inventory of infrastructure, the very first thing that we came up with was defining some broad categories. So the obvious one is water and sewer. Most folks think about water infrastructure, sewer infrastructure. Stormwater typically is a separate utility in most municipal contexts. So we felt like that was a good, worthwhile one. Electric being the electric distribution system, not so much the transmission system, but the distribution, how that could be used, what infrastructure or what data may be around for that. Gas, so natural gas to home sites. And then the last one is one that we didn't really consider that came into the conversation very quickly. And there's been numerous presentations during the conference about telecom or about data providers or wide area data or broadband, whichever word you wanted to stick to that. But we kind of rolled back on telecom, but we're really focusing on communication technologies there. So phone, internet, those kinds of pieces. Another one that came into the conversation was transportation. So transportation networks being street maps and things of that nature. And we as a group collectively thought that that was probably already being accomplished through DOT or through local governments were making that data available in street centerline form, that kind of thing. So with use cases, I'd already kind of touched on this, but we looked at private development. So this idea of, say, economic development. So if you're a private developer, what kind of data would be important to you and how would that data be used? So there's a couple of different scales there. There's the first scale that's kind of the screening level, if you will. So if you are a business interest and you're looking for a place to relocate or a place to build your business, then you have definite considerations that you need to get to. First is available property, of course. Maybe zoning, those kinds of decisions come into play, but pretty soon after that, you start looking at infrastructure. Is water and sewer available? Do I have adequate electricity or electrical connectivity, so to speak? Or maybe you need gas, for some type of heat transfer or something like that. All of those are big considerations at that screening level. So for a municipal context, if you're looking for economic development or you're kind of keeping an eye toward that, being able to access infrastructure data is particularly important from the development piece because it can make your community look more valuable or help you build tax revenue that could, sustain your area, your agency, or your community for some point in the future. So it would bring jobs, it would bring all of these other kinds of things. So that's kind of at the screening level. And then once you dip beneath that, then you start getting into the more specific and the word that comes up there a lot is capacity. How much capacity does the water system have? How much capacity does the sewer system have? Those kinds of things. And all of that could be facilitated through data. But we'll get to in just a little bit about some of the security things that we're dealing with now about that. I mentioned an example as far as the use case goes of DOT, so highway realignment or intersection moving or intersection reconstruction, that kind of thing. Emergency management. You think about the situation that's going on in Texas right now, which is very much related to infrastructure. It's related to, kind of a service interruption in infrastructure. But if data was made available, how could we more effectively plan? So that would be another use case. In terms of what we get impacted with in North Carolina, typically are hurricanes or flooding events. How could we minimize the effects of that, if any, if we had infrastructure data readily available? And then different things, broadband availability, DQ service areas, those kinds of things, knowing how that we could communicate with our public. So if we've got, say, a boil water notice or something like that, how could we communicate that, or how could we better serve our management by knowing what these areas are that may be impacted? So all those being examples of use cases. So moving on, we had talked about the data inventory. Then we came up with an idea, okay, well, we need to categorize each one of these layers, if you will, or each one of these elements that's been introduced in our data inventory in terms of its sharing. So the three categories that we came up with for sharing were open sharing, or making it publicly available. And in the middle one, I've got that grayed out because it's something we'll have to speak to in a little bit, but sharing through a secure website or through a secure service. So something that the user has to authenticate with. And then making sure that that is economically feasible, because there's anytime that you impose security on a data offering, there's some amount of administration and how that might manifest, or how much that would cost. And then the final stage is by individual request only. So that's where someone is interested in some amount of data or a specific area of data, how they go through and contact that data provider, and if they can get that information, or if it's available by request only. So the documentation that we did there was to take, again, each one of those data layers, put it into its bucket or its category, if you will, and then document how data producers share that, and the rationale for why an organization shares a particular layer and doesn't share another layer. What kind of things are referenced there? Is it a Homeland Security kind of directive that is stopping them from sharing it? Or is there, something else that is interrupting that? And then, we've talked about this idea of discussion, so finding similarities or differences between groups. So between city A and city B. Well, city A might release this particular data set and city B may not, and they're holding that back. So we're trying to learn from each other here too. But again, just in this documentation process, and the real key word there is why. Why do we impose these sharing credentials, if you will, or why do we only release it at a certain level? What are we guarding against is basically where we're at there. So if we dive into what we found as a group in terms of layers, the things that are openly available are things like electric service areas. I think we've all seen those electrical disruption maps, if you will. So when you've got a power outage, or those outage maps that are aggregated by county, maybe in some context, or by a census tract or something like that, we've seen those. Stormwater infrastructure, you might see control measures, which might be areas where we could stop stormwater flow or interrupt stormwater flow, pond areas, manholes, open channels, or ditches. Those kinds of things may be publicly available. And in fact, we found some folks where they were releasing those publicly. And then water and sewer, we've got some public layers of easements. So sometimes within the tax, the cadastry of a county, they may make easements available. So we could see those publicly. And again, service areas, so water and sewer service areas. But what I want to call your attention to is that there's not a lot of detail here as far as publicly available data sets. And I'm not arguing for or against that. I just wanted to make that a point. And then if we look by secure website, and again, what I should say there is by currently available secure websites. I think that this is one of those places where technology is going to provide a better mechanism for us to do things in the future, but not a lot of folks are offering this. In fact, about the only things that we ran across were like secure FTP. Some folks were making some data available via secure FTP, and that was kind of a two-step process. So you had to sign a data use agreement, basically, and some amount of time, and then you were given credentials to that secure FTP site, and you would be able to download that and use it at will. And then those credentials would expire over some time. I think that was something that one of our representatives in the work group had mentioned. But again, you look at the number of layers there, there's only 4 listed that were in kind of this intermediate category. And I'm going to circle back to that in a little bit, but some of the things that you see is water service area buffers. So, and really what we're looking at there is buffers of more specific than service area. So it might be like infrastructure, like line work buffers or things of that nature. Some folks thought that there might be a potential for that. So that's kind of a generalized feature, if you will, but it's still held behind that secure mechanism, so that authenticated use only. And then the final request, or the final category, was by request only. So what that means is that the data producer is willing to share that information, but they share it on a very small scale. So in fact, if you had an address, you might call in and give them that address, and they might share a couple of blocks worth of information, but it would be very resolute information. So it would be as accurate as is possible, and it would be fully, encumbered with all of the relevant information that could be provided. So the line size, the fittings, the so on and so forth. And you can see that currently, most of the layers that we were able to introduce into the inventory were listed in this category. So by request only is how most of the data is being shared in the state currently, or at least that's what our work group came up with. So here, just some very specific things. You see things like gravity mains for stormwater and maybe sewer. You see water lines, pressure mains for the water side, hydrants, manholes, water tanks, so on and so forth. And again, a lot of the reason that that information is not being released is from the malicious use of that, or the potential for malicious use of that. So we're trying to guard against, or most folks that are producing this data are guarding against this idea of a bad act or a terrorist attack, those kinds of things. So all of those are very relevant. We understand what those are. So I just wanted to kind of give you a flavor for some of the information or the conversations that have came out of the work group.
Dean, we are running up against our time here. We have 2 minutes left.
Okay, well, I'll try to quickly get through it. So our current conclusion is that, there's not a lot that's available in a public content or a public context, if you will. We're looking at trying to secure a little bit more detail in that why question. So is there a Homeland Security directive that is being used here, or a agency data sharing agreement, those kinds of things. And then the final point there, landscape is unlikely to change without some monetary investment. So what that means is that that infrastructure, that intermediate piece, is maybe something that we could invest in if we could find someone to host it, or that kind of thing, maybe into the future. So our next steps are to finish up the use cases. So we've got about 20 so far. And develop a data prioritization plan. So going back to that layer list and kind of looking at, is the data likely to be shared? Does it currently exist? What the completeness of it is? Maybe what the accuracy assessment is, those kinds of things. And developing a broader understanding within the local governments as to how that is disseminated for state infrastructure, or for state layers, if we could. That might be a far-reaching goal, but it's one that we're kind of looking at. And then as far as our possible actions, again, some of the things that I've already said, but a couple of ideas are template disclaimers. So could we produce some sort of template disclaimers that we could disclose and put out for folks to use to encourage data sharing? And then this idea of a guidance document or recommendations or a BMP are actually what our final deliverable is going to be. And then I guess that kind of concludes, and I wanted to just leave this slide up for a little bit. That QR code that's listed in the bottom is to our TAC webpage. And from that TAC webpage, you'll be able to find the use case templates will be down toward the bottom, as well as the sort of charter or the project plan for what we're trying to do within the infrastructure work group. And again, I've included my contact information here, as well as the web page linkage. So the QR code and the web link there are one and the same. But at any rate, there are my email address is listed on the TAC web page as well. So with that, I guess we're kind of running out of time a little bit, so we can take a few questions, if any.
Thank you, Dean. That was really great. I have one quick question, but I want to encourage everyone to type their questions into the chat for Dean, and then we'll go ahead and answer those. The first question that I had was, do you want to speak a little bit to the template disclaimer and how that may actually protect data providers as a way when they're sharing their data?
Right. Well, you know, there's a couple of different aspects to data sharing. One being the accuracy of the data. So some people were fearful of releasing some amount of data and it not being spatially accurate or attribute accuracy. So I think the idea of template disclaimers would help us with that, to state the intended purpose of why the data is being made available, or what the assumptions are for the use of the data. So it couldn't be used for planning or things of that nature. It will be used more in a screening context. And I think that pretty much covers it, but it just kind of gives that fallback, or that available, and you know, it might be contact information might be distributed with that too. I think one of the things that we'll do in the future is to reach out to maybe the School of Government and see if they could help us with some template disclaimers, so that those could go into the BMP document, and then the data providers could use those kind of as a stock or a starting place for their disclaimers.
So I have a question here from Brett Spivey. He asks, what have you found to be the current landscape when it comes to how local governments are currently approaching infrastructure data sharing?
It's I think most of the time the data is being withheld, you know, and distributed on a case-by-case basis. That's, I think, the presumption of you know, what the group has found thus far. So you know, most folks are willing to share data, but they don't share the complete inventory or the complete system data. They share it on a much more small scale, kind of block by block kind of mechanism. And again, we're just trying to solicit information, or solicit you know, feedback to how folks are doing that. But I think that is the presumption of what the work group is finding thus far.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about some of the work that we've done on collecting regulations, best practices, and industry standards to include in the final document?
Yeah, and that was you know, really related to that slide that I kind of went through really quick there, but it was answering that question of why. Why are, you know, are you not releasing a piece of data and not? And what we're finding is that there are a number of places that we're finding some citing or some information about, with Homeland Security and with state statutes and maybe the Utilities Commission, where we're trying to roll those together and kind of build that into our best management practices document that'll come out later. So to try to include those as kind of a full feature. So there's a layer list, or an inventory, if you will. There's these use cases which kind of pair those things together. And then there's the current practices, and the current practices really would reference some of those statutes and things of that nature.
Great. So I think we're just about out of time. I just want to let everybody know that we have a session starting right after this. So I encourage you to check your agenda and find something that you'd like to go see next. Dean, I want to thank you for presenting today. This was really informative, and everyone enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.
Thanks.